Welcome back to our Reddit cheating stories. Where are you watching from? Please subscribe and let's dive in. My name is David. I'm 38, a software engineer by trade, and until a week ago, I believed myself to be happily married to Sarah, the woman I'd loved since we were awkward college students sharing late-night pizzas and dreams of a future filled with coding and travel. That future had arrived, or so I thought. We had a comfortable life, a cozy house with a sprawling garden Sarah meticulously tended, two well-behaved cats named Algorithm and Boolean, yes, I named them, and a circle of friends who envied our seemingly perfect relationship. And then, the vase shattered. It wasn't a literal shattering of glass, though that's how it felt. It was the shattering of trust, of hope, of the very foundation upon which I'd built my life. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd left work early, a rare occurrence, to surprise Sarah with tickets to see her favorite band. A sudden cancellation had freed up my afternoon, and I felt a surge of that old college-era excitement to do something spontaneous for her. The key turned in the lock, the familiar click echoing in the quiet house. Usually, Sarah would be in the garden, humming to herself as she pruned roses or coaxed vegetables from the earth. But the garden was empty. I called out her name. No answer. A flicker of unease settled in my stomach. Maybe she was at the store. Maybe she'd gone for a walk. I headed towards the kitchen, intending to leave a note. But as I passed our bedroom, I heard a sound. A muffled sound. A sound that stopped me dead in my tracks. It wasn't just any sound. It was the sound of intimacy. The sound of soft moans and whispered words. The sound of a bed creaking rhythmically. My blood ran cold. My hand, still clutching the concert tickets, trembled. I wanted to believe I was mistaken. That it was the TV. That it was some bizarre sound effect from a cooking show Sarah was watching. But deep down, I knew. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, the sounds assaulting my ears, each one a hammer blow to my soul. Then, driven by a force I couldn't control, I pushed the bedroom door open. The scene that greeted me was like a punch to the gut, knocking the air from my lungs. Sarah. And my brother, Mark. In our bed. Engaged in the most intimate act imaginable. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The colors of the room blurred. The sounds faded into a deafening roar in my ears. My brain struggled to process what my eyes were seeing. Sarah gasped, her face contorted in a mixture of shock and shame. Mark simply stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and something else I couldn't quite decipher. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My throat was constricted, my vocal cords paralyzed. I simply turned and walked out of the house, the concert tickets fluttering to the floor like fallen leaves. I drove. I drove aimlessly, the highway stretching out before me like a cruel metaphor for the uncertain road ahead. I had no destination in mind, no plan, just an overwhelming need to escape the suffocating reality of what I had witnessed. I ended up at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, a place that reeked of stale cigarette smoke and broken dreams. I checked in under a false name, paid in cash, and locked myself in the room. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faded floral wallpaper, the silence broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. The initial shock began to wear off, replaced by a tidal wave of emotions. Anger. Betrayal. Disgust. And, beneath it all, a deep, gnawing pain. How could she? How could they? Sarah, the woman I loved, the woman I'd trusted implicitly, had betrayed me in the most devastating way possible. And with my own brother, no less. Mark. My younger brother. The golden child. The one who always seemed to effortlessly excel at everything he did. The one I'd always looked out for, always supported, always loved. The irony wasn't lost on me. I, the reliable, predictable, stable brother, had been betrayed by the two people closest to me. It was a plot twist worthy of a soap opera, a cruel joke played by the universe. I spent the night in that motel room, a vortex of despair and rage swirling inside me. I replayed the scene in my head over and over again, each time feeling the pain anew. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, their bodies intertwined, their betrayal etched in my mind. By morning, I was a shell of my former self. Exhausted, emotionally drained, and utterly broken. But as the first rays of sunlight crept through the grimy motel window, a flicker of resolve began to ignite within me. I couldn't stay here, wallowing in self-pity. I had to do something. I checked out of the motel, drove back to the house, and packed a bag. I didn't speak to Sarah. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn, but I couldn't bring myself to utter a single word to her. The sight of her filled me with such intense revulsion that I feared I might lose control. I left a note on the table. One word: divorce. I moved into a small apartment downtown, a temporary solution while I figured out what to do with my life. The apartment was sterile and impersonal, a far cry from the warm, inviting home I'd shared with Sarah. But it was a sanctuary, a place where I could try to piece myself back together. The days that followed were a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and awkward conversations with friends and family. The divorce proceedings were thankfully swift and relatively painless. Sarah didn't contest anything. She seemed genuinely remorseful, but her remorse meant nothing to me. The trust was gone, irrevocably shattered. The hardest part was dealing with Mark. He tried to call me, to text me, to explain. But I refused to speak to him. I couldn't bear to hear his voice, to see his face. He had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way possible, and I couldn't find it in myself to forgive him. Our parents were devastated. They couldn't understand what had happened, how their two sons could have fallen so far. They tried to mediate, to bring us together, but I refused. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too profound. I threw myself into my work, seeking solace in the familiar rhythm of coding and problem-solving. It was a temporary distraction, a way to numb the pain, but it wasn't a solution. I was still haunted by the image of Sarah and Mark, still plagued by the questions that swirled endlessly in my mind. Why? Why did she do it? Why did he do it? What had I done wrong? Was I not good enough? Was I not attentive enough? Was I not enough? These questions gnawed at me, eroding my self-esteem and fueling my insecurities. I started to withdraw from my friends, isolating myself in my apartment, drowning my sorrows in late-night movies and take-out food. I knew I was spiraling, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. The pain was too intense, the betrayal too deep. I felt like I was adrift at sea, lost and alone, with no hope of rescue. One evening, a knock on my door startled me. I hadn't seen anyone in days. Hesitantly, I opened the door. Standing there was Emily, one of Sarah's closest friends. I hadn't spoken to her since the divorce. I'd assumed she'd taken Sarah's side. "David, can I come in?" she asked, her voice soft. I hesitated, then nodded. I didn't know what she wanted, but I couldn't bring myself to turn her away. Emily stepped inside, her eyes scanning the sparsely furnished apartment. She didn't say anything for a moment, then turned to me, her expression filled with concern. "David, I'm worried about you," she said. "I haven't seen you in weeks, and Sarah tells me you're not doing well." "Sarah?" I scoffed. "What does she care?" "She cares," Emily said firmly. "She's made a terrible mistake, David, and she knows it. But that doesn't mean she doesn't care about you." I turned away, unable to meet her gaze. "It doesn't matter," I muttered. "It's over." "It doesn't have to be," Emily said. "David, I'm not here to defend Sarah. What she did was unforgivable. But I am here to tell you that you can't let this destroy you. You're a good person, David. You deserve to be happy." Her words struck a chord within me. I looked at Emily, really looked at her, and saw genuine concern in her eyes. Maybe she was right. Maybe I couldn't let this define me. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "Start by talking to someone," Emily said. "Get some help. Don't let this fester inside you." She gave me the name of a therapist, a woman who specialized in dealing with infidelity and trauma. I took the card, hesitated, then thanked her. Emily smiled sadly. "Take care of yourself, David," she said. "And don't give up on happiness." After she left, I stared at the therapist's card for a long time. I wasn't sure if it would help, but I knew I had to try something. I couldn't continue down this path of self-destruction. I made an appointment with the therapist, Dr. Anya Sharma. Our first session was difficult. I struggled to articulate my feelings, to put into words the pain and anger that consumed me. But Dr. Sharma was patient and understanding. She listened without judgment, offering gentle guidance and support. Over the weeks that followed, I began to unpack the emotional baggage I'd been carrying. I explored the roots of my insecurities, the patterns of behavior that had contributed to the breakdown of my marriage. I learned to identify my triggers, to manage my anger, and to develop healthier coping mechanisms. Dr. Sharma also encouraged me to focus on self-care, to prioritize my physical and emotional well-being. I started exercising regularly, eating healthier, and reconnecting with my hobbies. I rediscovered my love for photography, spending hours exploring the city with my camera, capturing the beauty and resilience of urban life. It was a slow and arduous process, but gradually, I began to heal. The pain didn't disappear entirely, but it became less intense, less all-consuming. I started to see a glimmer of hope, a possibility of a future beyond the shadow of betrayal. One of the most difficult things I had to confront was my relationship with Mark. Dr. Sharma encouraged me to consider whether reconciliation was possible, but I remained resistant. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too raw. However, she did help me understand that holding onto anger and resentment was only hurting me. She suggested that I write Mark a letter, expressing my feelings without necessarily expecting a response. I hesitated, but eventually, I decided to try it. I spent days composing and revising the letter, pouring out my heart onto the page. I told Mark how much I'd loved him, how much I'd looked up to him, and how deeply his betrayal had wounded me. I didn't excuse his actions, but I did acknowledge that he was human, capable of making mistakes. I didn't send the letter immediately. I held onto it for weeks, rereading it, revising it, until I felt I'd said everything I needed to say. Then, finally, I mailed it. I didn't expect a response. But a few days later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Mark. His letter was filled with remorse and regret. He admitted that he'd made a terrible mistake, that he'd been consumed by jealousy and insecurity. He explained that he'd always envied my stability and success, that he'd seen Sarah as a symbol of the life he craved. He didn't try to excuse his actions, but he did offer a sincere apology. He understood that he may have lost my trust forever, but he hoped that one day, I could find it in my heart to forgive him. Reading his letter was a cathartic experience. It didn't erase the pain, but it did offer a sense of closure. I realized that I didn't have to forgive Mark to move on with my life. I could simply accept that he'd made a mistake, and that I needed to let go of the anger and resentment that were poisoning me. I didn't respond to his letter. I wasn't ready to resume our relationship. But I did feel a sense of peace, a sense that I was finally on the path to healing. As time went on, I started to rebuild my life. I focused on my work, on my hobbies, and on nurturing my friendships. I started dating again, cautiously at first, but eventually, I met someone who sparked my interest. Her name was Olivia. She was a kind, intelligent, and compassionate woman who had also experienced her share of heartbreak. We connected on a deep level, sharing our vulnerabilities and supporting each other's dreams. Olivia helped me to trust again, to open my heart to the possibility of love. She showed me that not all women were like Sarah, that genuine love and loyalty did exist. With Olivia by my side, I began to feel like myself again. The pain of the past didn't disappear entirely, but it no longer defined me. I had learned from my experiences, grown from my mistakes, and emerged stronger and more resilient than before. One day, I received a call from my mother. She told me that Mark was getting married. He was marrying a woman named Emily, someone he'd met through a support group for people who had made mistakes in their past relationships. My mother invited me to the wedding. I hesitated. I hadn't seen Mark in years. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face him. But after talking to Olivia, I decided to go. I realized that holding onto the past was only preventing me from fully embracing the present. It was time to let go of the anger and resentment, to wish my brother well, and to move on with my life. The wedding was a small, intimate affair. When I saw Mark, I felt a surge of emotions. But this time, the emotions were not anger and resentment. They were something akin to forgiveness. We exchanged a few awkward words, but there was no animosity, no bitterness. I could see that Mark was genuinely happy, that he had learned from his mistakes and was committed to building a better life. I met Emily, his bride-to-be, and was struck by her warmth and sincerity. She seemed like a good person, someone who could help Mark heal and grow. As I watched Mark exchange vows with Emily, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I realized that I had finally closed the chapter on the past. I had forgiven Mark, not for his sake, but for my own. I had released the anger and resentment that had been weighing me down, and I was finally free to move on with my life. After the wedding, Mark approached me. "David," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot to me." I smiled. "I'm happy for you, Mark," I said. "I wish you and Emily all the best." We shook hands, a silent acknowledgement of the past and a hopeful glimpse into the future. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. I left the wedding with Olivia by my side, feeling lighter and more hopeful than I had in years. The lilies were still planted in Sarah's garden, blooming once again. But I no longer felt the sting of betrayal when I saw them. I saw them as a symbol of resilience, of the ability to bloom even after the harshest of winters. I had been through hell and back, but I had survived. I had learned from my mistakes, forgiven those who had wronged me, and found love and happiness again. The shattered vase had been pieced back together, not perfectly, but with a strength and beauty that it had never possessed before. The journey wasn't easy, and the scars would always remain. But I had learned that even in the face of betrayal and heartbreak, it was possible to rebuild, to heal, and to find happiness again. The future was uncertain, but I was ready to face it, armed with the knowledge that I was stronger than I ever thought possible. And that, in the end, was all that truly mattered. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like and share your thoughts.